Australian exporters scramble as fears of more China trade bans grow. The Morrison government has accused China of heightening trade risks and breaching Xi Jinping's own public pledges as a range of Australian export sectors braced for new disruption as soon as Friday. Guiding Australian understands some Australian wine exporters have suspended shipments to China based on requests from their Chinese import partners, amid fears officials in Beijing are about to press ahead with bans on a raft of goods. Lobster exporters have also been trying to clarify the holds-up they have experienced since late last week, while the Trade Minister Simon Birmingham hid out at Beijing for sending continued uncertain and inconsistent messages. Some Australian-based analysts argued the Chinese government was engaging in psychological warfare by flagging vulgarly defined potential sanctions that may or may not eventuate. The state-run Global Times published an article late on Wednesday saying Australia was nervous about losing access to the Chinese market after China halted 7 categories of Australian goods for the market. The article did not provide new details but treated the development as fact, even though China's Commerce Ministry had earlier in the week dismissed rumors of potential disruptions to Australian wine, lobster, sugar, coal, timber, barley, and copper from Friday onwards. The apparent confirmation of looming trade actions coincides with the third China International Import-Export, which is being held in Shanghai this week. Xi, the Chinese president, reportedly told the opening ceremony he aimed to turn the China market into a market for the world, a market shared by all, and a market accessible to all, in order to bring more positive energy to the global community. But Birmingham said the inconsistent messages from China about what was happening with Australian exports were heightening risks and also undermined the statements made by President Xi as the import-export. If China is to be true to the statements of its government, then it should provide confidence that normal customs and related processes will apply to imports of goods such as seafood and wine, Birmingham said in a statement. Hours before Birmingham issued the strongly worded statement, Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, told reporters, China has denied that is what they are doing and can only take that at face value out of respect for the comprehensive strategic partnership we have with China. Dr. Jeffrey Wilson, a trade expert who is the research director of the Perth U.S. Asia Center at the University of Western Australia, said he believed China's tactics were a case of gray zone diplomacy. The ambiguity is by design, he said. It's not a trade war, it's psychological war. Wilson said the uncertainty was principally designed to strike fear into a large number of Australian companies that their shipments to China might not get cleared. China is Australia's number one trading partner, making up 33% of Australia's total export. Sowing that fear, he said, would provide additional ballasts to those commentators who were pressing the Australian government to soften its stance towards China in an effort to fix the relationship. Wilson said the moves also sent a message to import partners who may be thinking of doing business with Australian exports at the trade fair this week. Richard McGregor, a senior fellow at the Lowy Institute, said China wanted Australia to pay a price for their political disagreements, especially the call for the international inquiry into COVID-19. Whether or not the hard ban goes into place on Friday, Chinese importers of all sorts of goods have been sent an unmistakable signal by the Chinese government that it is pointless building business ties with Australia because they can be interrupted overnight because of politics, McGregor said. So even if business doesn't stop this week, it's going to come to a stop at some point. So why bother investing in the relationship? Guardian Australia understands wine exporters have still not had anything officially confirmed, but several have suspended shipments to China to avoid any risk at the border. This step was taken at the request of importers. However, one of Australia's biggest operators, Treasury Wine Estates, which makes Penfolds, is believed to have continued business as normal with China this week. Shares in Treasury Wine Estate fell by 8% on Thursday after it informed the stock market it had become aware China's domestic drinks industry was lobbying Beijing to impose retrospective tariffs on Australian wine. That domestic request was associated with an ongoing anti-dumping investigation into Australian wine that was launched by China's Commerce Ministry in August and is scheduled to take up to 12 months to complete. Wilson questioned how it would even be possible for authorities to implement backdated tariffs on products that had cleared customs, being sold and consumed. Related to the China challenge to get a sense of how bad relations might get. Look back to magazine. I'll be honest with you, I have a PhD in trade policy from the Australian Nation University, and I've never heard of retrospective tariffs in my life, he said. While Australian and Chinese officials continued talks through diplomatic channels, Australian ministers have reported being unable to reach their Chinese counterparts for several months. Birmingham said earlier this week that this situation had not changed, but the Australian government remained keen to dialogue. China's embassy in Australia has not commented directly on the potential new trade actions, but has referred guiding Australia to comments from the Foreign Ministry spokesperson on Tuesday that the Chinese authorities take inspection and quarantine measures on imported products in accordance with laws and regulations. China's foreign ministry urged Australia to bring the bilateral relations back to the right track. Mauritius oil spill likely to be cleaned up by January, ship owners say. The cleanup of massive oil spill in August from a vessel off Mauritius will likely be mostly completed by January, the bulk carrier's owner, Japan's Nagasaki Shipping, said Thursday. Of the roughly 1,000 tons that spilled from the Panamanian-flagged MV Wakaskisho, all of the oil that had been floating in the ocean had been recovered. Nagasaki Shipping said in a statement. Work to remove the oil along approximately 30 kilometers of coastline was proceeding smoothly and would likely be completed by January, it said. The vessel, chartered by Mitsui O.S.K. Lines Limited, ran aground on a reef in Mauritius on July 25th and began leaking oil on August 6th. The spilled oil had spread over a vast area of endangered corals, affecting fish and other marine life in what some scientists have called the Indian Ocean island's worst ecological disaster. Nagasaki Shipping also said the planned removal of the rear portion of the vessel would begin in late December and last several months. The front part was scuttled in August as instructed by local authorities. Pope censures key department over London real estate deal. Vatican City. Pope Francis, in an unprecedented move to contain the damage from a London real estate deal, has stripped the Vatican's Secretariat of State's control over its own funds and put them under the supervision of Holy See Economic Office. The Pope's decision, announced in a statement and a papal letter on Thursday, comes after Francis in September fired the cardinal involved the Secretariat purchase of a luxury building in London as an investment. A crashed students' movement and shrinking hope ahead of Myanmar's election. Myanmar teacher Hind grew up idolizing Aung San Suu Kyi, the one-time democracy icon who now leads her country. But when voters go to the polls on Sunday for the second general election since the end of military rule, he will not back her. While Suski's National League for Democracy (NLD) is expected to win again on the strength of the leader's enduring popularity, critics such as him say she has failed to make good on promises to unite the country. I have no more trust in her, said the 21-year-old of Nobel Peace Prize literate. The path she is trying to take towards democracy is impossible, far from the wave of optimism that greeted the NLD's landslide win in 2015. Myanmar goes into this election facing a surging coronavirus outbreak, rising economic hardship, and escalating civil and ethnic conflicts. He is one of dozens of activities from a student group behind anti-government protests and leaflet campaigns across the country in recent months. The All Burma Federation of Student Union, which urged a boycott of the vote, a fringing group at the sharp edge of deepening disillusionment in parts of the country. Their campaign has been met with a sharp crackdown. 9 have been sentenced, 2 of them to 5 years in prison for causing public mischief among other charges, while 10 others are in police custody and more than a dozen are in hiding. Representatives of the NLD and the government did not answer phone calls from realtors seeking comment. Suu Kyi's defenders say the students are unrealistic to expect rapid change after half a century of military rule and are hampering efforts to secure gradual progress. Everyone is trying so hard to expel the dictatorship, said Buddhist monk Sabita. They are making problems. It's definitely not acceptable. The ABFSU began a No More War campaign in March, with students putting up posters and handing out leaflets condemning the war in Rakhine State. Rakhine is a region bordering Bangladesh, from which more than 730,000 Rohingya Muslims were expelled in 2017 after the military crackdown the United Nations has said was executed with genocidal intent. Myanmar denies accusations of genocide during what it says was a legitimate counterinsurgency campaign. Now Rakhine is the site of another conflict between government troops and the Arakan Army, an ethnic armed group that recruits from the mostly Buddhist local majority in its quest for greater state autonomy. The army has denied targeting civilians in the latest conflict, which has killed dozens and displaced tens of thousands, and declared the Arakan Army a terrorist organization. In cities and towns across the country, the students have distributed pamphlets and put up posters with slogans like "Dictatorships must fail" and "Oppose murderous fascism," and urging the government to lift the curbs on the internet in Rakhine. King said she sympathized with the victims of the war because she grew up in the northern Rakhine state, which has also been ravaged by insurgency. The civilian government has done nothing to stop the conflict and was a puppet of the army, she said, blaming the junta-drafted 2008 constitution that reserved key powers for the military and gives the aid a veto to changes to the charter. As a teacher, I want a better future for the children, he said. With this constitution, nothing will happen. Deep reads Maya Tudor, a lecturer at the Barking School of Government of Oxford University, who studies democratic transition, said the NLD had failed to make domestic democratic changes within its power, maintaining tight curbs on the media and persecuting critics. The promise of an NLD-led democratic deepening has evaporated amid backsliding, she said. The transition is in deep freeze. Government ministers have set expectations on what the NLD could achieve in its first term were unrealistically high, but that the administration was revoked some oppressive junta-era legislation and plans for the reform. Interest in politics has fallen since 2015. However, with pessimism highest in ethnic areas where many people feel sidelined by the bullish Burma majority government, according to a survey by local watchdog, the People's Alliance for Credible Elections, ethnic-based parties are expected to pull some votes away from the NLD. But internal migration and the first-past-the-post electoral system means this may not translate into seats, analysts say, and elections have been cancelled in more than 50 townships due to insurgencies. Richard Horsey, a Younger-based analyst with the International Crisis Group, said in 2015, many ethnic minorities saw Suu Kyi's party as natural allies, but they have now come to see the NLD as an adversary governing in the interests of the majority. He said this could drive more amid the conflict. This story clerk's typo goes to go in paragraph 1. Reporting by